She arrived at that farm on Christmas Eve with nothing but a tattered suitcase and a broken heart, and what she found there changed her life in ways that not even the heavens could have predicted. Can you imagine being so rejected by your own family that you accept work as a temporary cook in a strange place, miles from anywhere, just to have a roof over your head on the holiest night of the year? But this story happened in the rural heartland of Tennessee in December of 1942, at a farm called Hope Valley. If you are watching this video right now, leave a comment down below telling me where you are joining me from. Write your city, your state, or even your country if you're far away. I read every single comment, and it brings me so much joy to know these stories reach so many different places. And if you aren't subscribed to the channel yet, subscribe now and hit that notification bell, because here we tell stories from the old days that touch the heart. The dirt road stretched out under the pale winter sun like a frozen scar, cutting through the barren landscape. Mary Carter gripped her suitcase with both hands, feeling the weight of the few belongings she carried and the even heavier weight of the words she had heard 3 days prior. Her father's words echoed in her memory like a sentence with no appeal. "You are no daughter of mine anymore," he had said, his voice as cold as flint. "Either you agree to marry Jeremiah, or you leave my house today." Mary chose to leave. She chose the road, the uncertainty, the terror of the unknown, because she knew that marrying Jeremiah Tate was choosing a different kind of death. The man was 43, had the stench of moonshine on his breath, a reputation for beating his 2 previous wives, and eyes that undressed her with a hunger that turned her stomach. No, Mary thought as she walked. Anything was better than that. The midday wind bit at the exposed skin of her face. She was 24 years old and had never left the small town of Cedarville where she was born. But then again, she had never had a choice before. She had never had a voice. Since her mother died in childbirth, since she was born taking with her the only person who could have loved her, Mary had lived as a shadow in her own home. Her father remarried 2 years later. Then came the step-siblings. Then came the treatment of a servant. Then came the cruel nickname they used in whispers, but which she heard perfectly well. The wretched one, the one who killed her mother. Mary stopped for a moment and wiped the cold dampness from her brow with the back of her hand. The landscape around her consisted of harvested cornfields, empty barns, and scattered shacks. December was a harsh month in the valley. A month where the ground freezes solid and the sky turns a stark white. But it was also the month of Christmas, the month when families gathered, decorated trees, lit candles, and sang carols, the month when she would be more alone than ever. The letter she carried in the pocket of her threadbare dress promised temporary work. An acquaintance from town, Mrs. Edwards, had a cousin who worked as a housekeeper at a large estate near St. Clair, a town 2 hours' walk from there. They needed an extra cook for the Christmas feast the landowner hosted every year. The pay was meager, but it included food and a place to sleep for a few days. Mary accepted without hesitation. Any port in such a storm was a blessing. She resumed her walk. Her feet ached inside her worn-out boots. The suitcase grew heavier with every step, but Mary had learned early on to endure. She learned to swallow her tears, to keep her head down, to do the work without complaint. She learned that complaining only brought more pain. She grew up hearing her stepmother say she should be grateful for the food she ate, the floor she slept on, the roof that covered her, as if her existence were a favor, as if breathing were a debt. Memories came in a cascade as she walked. She remembered the freezing mornings, waking before everyone else to light the wood stove. She remembered making breakfast for the family and eating only what was left, if anything was left. She remembered the new dresses her stepmother sewed for her 2 daughters while she wore patched-up hand-me-downs until they turned to rags. She remembered Christmases sitting alone in the kitchen after serving dinner, listening to the laughter in the parlor, the sound of happy voices that never included her. She remembered the last Christmas most of all. It had been exactly a year ago. The whole family gathered at the big dining table, her father at the head, stepmother by his side, step-siblings laughing and telling stories, and her in the kitchen, alone, eating scraps. That was when she decided she needed to get out. That was when she started saving the few coins she managed to earn sewing for neighbors in secret. That was when she started dreaming of a different life, even without knowing what shape that life might take. The sound of horse hooves pulled her from her thoughts. Mary turned her head and saw a wagon approaching down the road. The man driving was old, wearing a tattered straw hat and a weary expression. He slowed down as he passed her, looked with curiosity, but didn't stop. Mary didn't expect him to. She knew a woman alone on the road was cause for suspicion. She could be a runaway, mad, or sick. Nobody stopped to help someone who might bring trouble. She kept walking. The sun began to dip toward the west. The shadows grew longer on the frost-hardened ground. Mary calculated she still had at least an hour before reaching St. Clair. Her feet throbbed. Her throat was dry as sandpaper. But she couldn't stop. She needed to arrive before nightfall. A deserted road at night was too dangerous. That was when she saw the crooked wooden sign on the side of the road. St. Clair, 3 miles. Hope Valley Farm, 2 miles. Mary's heart skipped a beat. She was close. Closer than she imagined. She took a deep breath, adjusted the suitcase in her hand, which was already numb, and quickened her pace. The fatigue seemed lesser now that her destination was within reach. The landscape began to change. The cornfields gave way to vast, dormant fields of winter wheat and groves of evergreens. The trees grew taller. The air smelled different, the scent of pine needles and damp earth. Mary had never seen a real estate farm. In the village where she grew up, the properties were small, just subsistence plots. But this was different. This was grand, organized, prosperous. She rounded a bend and finally saw the gate. It was wrought iron, with the name Hope Valley Farm written in elegant letters across the top arch. Beyond the gate, a driveway lined with ancient oak trees led up to the main house, which rose in the background, white and imposing against the blue winter sky. Mary stopped for a moment, intimidated. It was much bigger, much more beautiful than she had imagined. For a second, she thought about turning back. She thought they would look at her and see exactly what she was. A reject. A nobody. But then she remembered she had nowhere to go back to, that going back meant marrying Jeremiah or freezing on the streets, that this was her only chance. Mary swallowed her fear, lifted her chin, and walked through the gate. The driveway was long and beautiful. The bare branches of the oaks formed a tunnel overhead, swaying gently in the afternoon breeze. Up close, the main house was even more impressive. 2 stories, a wraparound porch, windows with shutters painted a deep forest green. In the side gardens, there were manicured hedges, stone benches, and a fountain where the water had frozen into glistening sculptures. Mary had never seen so much beauty in one place. It looked like something out of a dream. It seemed impossible that she could be there. She walked up the steps of the front porch with her heart pounding in her chest. Before she could knock on the door, it opened. A woman of about 50, short, stout, with greying hair tied in a bun and a pristine white apron, appeared in the doorway. Her brown eyes assessed Mary from head to toe in a second. "You must be Mary," the woman said, her voice firm but not unkind. "I'm Mrs. Higgins, the housekeeper. I've been expecting you since this morning." Mary apologized, explaining she had walked all the way from Cedarville. Mrs. Higgins made a sound of understanding and ushered her inside. The young woman crossed the threshold and found herself in a wide foyer with polished floorboards that shone, pale walls, and dark wood furniture. Everything was impeccably clean and organized. There was an arrangement of holly and pine branches on a round table in the center, and the smell was sweet and spicy, cinnamon and cloves. Mrs. Higgins led Mary down a side hallway that went to the back of the house. They passed a massive kitchen with a cast-iron stove, a stone sink, and shelves full of copper pots and white china. Then past the storerooms, past a pantry stocked with preserves. Finally, they reached a small but clean room with a narrow bed, a simple dresser, and a window that looked out onto the orchard. "This will be your room while you're working here," the housekeeper explained. "You can put your things away and freshen up. Then come to the kitchen and I'll explain the duties. The feast is the day after tomorrow, so we have a lot to do." Mary thanked her in a low voice. Mrs. Higgins looked at her closely, and for the first time her expression softened a little. "You must be tired from the journey," she said. "I'll send Josie to bring you some warm water to wash up. Rest for half an hour, then meet us in the kitchen." When the housekeeper left and closed the door, Mary finally allowed her legs to give way. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked around. It was a simple room, a servant's room, smaller than the woodshed at her father's house, but it was clean. It smelled of lavender. The bed had crisp white sheets and a thick wool quilt folded at the foot. The window let in the golden light of the late afternoon. And for the first time in 3 days, Mary felt something akin to relief. She opened her suitcase and took out the few clothes she had brought. 2 patched dresses, a slip, a moth-eaten wool shawl, a hairbrush with half the bristles missing. It was everything she owned in the world. Everything that remained of 24 years of existence. Mary put the clothes in the dresser, feeling a heavy sadness in her chest. But she didn't allow the tears to fall. She had cried too much in the last 3 days. Now she needed to be strong. She needed to work. She needed to survive. Someone knocked lightly on the door. It was a young girl, maybe 17 or 18, African-American, slender, with sweet eyes and a shy smile. She carried a basin of steaming water and a clean towel. The girl introduced herself as Josie and placed the basin on the dresser. She asked if Mary needed anything else. Mary said no and thanked her. Josie smiled and left the room with light steps. Mary washed slowly, feeling the warm water soothe her wind-chapped skin. She changed her clothes, putting on the least worn dress she had. She pulled her brown hair back into a simple bun. She looked at her reflection in the small cracked mirror on the wall and saw what she always saw, a plain woman, too thin, dark circles under her eyes, dull brown eyes, nothing special, nothing worth noticing. She left the room and went back to the kitchen. Mrs. Higgins was already there, sleeves rolled up, sorting ingredients on the long wooden table. She looked up when Mary entered and beckoned her over. The housekeeper explained that Hope Valley Farm had a tradition. Every year, on Christmas night, the master of the house hosted a grand feast for the farmhands and their families, and also for the needy folks in the county. People came from all over St. Clair and the surrounding areas. It was over 100 people. The dinner had everything: roast ham, turkey, cornbread stuffing, mashed potatoes with gravy, green bean casserole, salads, pies, cakes, gingerbread fruitcake. It was heavy work, but beautiful work. It was the most important night of the year there at the farm. Mary listened to everything intently. She asked how long this tradition had existed. Mrs. Higgins hesitated for a moment, and something passed through her eyes, something like sadness. "It started 3 years ago," she replied in a lower voice, "since the mistress passed away." Mary felt curious, but didn't ask anything else. She knew how to recognize pain when she saw it. She knew that some stories weren't meant to be touched right away. Mrs. Higgins took a deep breath and returned to her practical tone. She began listing the tasks. They needed to take a full inventory of ingredients, check what was missing to buy in town, and start preparing the sweets that needed time to set. Mary nodded and set to work. The hours passed quickly. Mary discovered she liked the work. She liked the rhythm, the organization, the smell of food being prepared. She had grown up cooking for her father's family, so she knew how to do everything. She knew how to knead dough, season meat, make pumpkin pie, prepare stuffing. Mrs. Higgins quickly noticed she was skilled and meticulous. The housekeeper didn't say anything, but her look became less suspicious, more approving. When the sun began to set, Mrs. Higgins announced it was time to stop. Mary washed her hands in the stone sink, drying them on the borrowed apron. That was when she heard heavy boots entering the kitchen. She turned her head and saw him for the first time. He was a tall man, must have been near 6 feet. Broad shoulders of someone who works the land, dark hair with a few grey strands at the temples, olive skin, tanned from the sun and wind, stubble shadowing a face with strong features. But what caught Mary's attention most were his eyes. They were dark brown, deep, and carried a sadness so heavy it was almost palpable. They were the eyes of someone who had suffered, eyes of someone carrying a burden. Mrs. Higgins hurried to make the introductions. Mr. Edward, this is Mary Carter, the girl who came to help with the feast. Mary, this is Mr. Edward Thorne, the owner of the farm. Edward inclined his head in a brief nod. Welcome, he said, his voice deep and slow. I hope you are comfortable. Mary murmured her thanks, looking down, as she had learned to do all her life. She didn't dare raise her eyes again. She felt his presence filling the entire kitchen. She felt something strange in the air, something she couldn't name. Edward asked Mrs. Higgins about the preparations. The housekeeper assured him everything was under control, that they would start the bulk of the work the next morning. He nodded, took a cup of coffee from the stove, and left the kitchen without saying another word. But before disappearing down the hallway, he turned his head for an instant, and his eyes met Mary's. It was only a second, less than a second. But it was enough for her to feel something pierce her chest like an arrow. Mrs. Higgins sighed heavily after he left. Poor man, she murmured as if talking to herself. He never recovered. Mary found the courage to ask from what. The housekeeper looked at her and seemed to evaluate whether she should tell or not. Finally, she decided. His wife, Mrs. Isabel, died 3 years ago. It was an accident. The carriage overturned on the road back from town. It was on Christmas Eve. Since then, Mr. Edward hasn't been the same. He became a shadow of a man. He fulfills his obligations, runs the farm, organizes the feast every year in her memory, but he doesn't really live. He just exists. Mary felt something tighten inside her chest. She knew that pain. It was different from hers, but deep down it was the same. The pain of losing someone, the pain of being left behind, the pain of surviving when a part of you died too. The 2 women ate dinner in the kitchen. Mrs. Higgins served vegetable soup with fresh bread. Mary ate slowly, savoring every spoonful. She was used to bad food and little of it. This was a banquet. After dinner, the housekeeper dismissed her, saying the next day would be long. Mary retreated to the little room, put on her patched nightgown, and lay down on the narrow bed. The mattress was firm but comfortable. The sheets smelled of fresh soap. Through the cracked window, the sounds of the winter night drifted in, the wind whistling through the eaves, a distant owl hooting. Mary closed her eyes and tried to sleep, but the image of those sad eyes wouldn't leave her mind, the eyes of Edward Thorne, the eyes of a man who had lost the ability to smile. She finally fell asleep when the moon was high. She dreamed of confusing things. She dreamed of tables full of food. She dreamed of voices singing Christmas carols. She dreamed of a man with sad eyes reaching out his hand to her. But when she went to take his hand, she woke up. The next day started early. Scarcely had the sun risen when Mrs. Higgins was knocking on the bedroom door. Mary dressed quickly, pinned up her hair, and ran to the kitchen. The work was brutal. They had to prepare the cake batter, get the meats marinating, peel pounds of potatoes and carrots, sort the ingredients for the stuffing. Josie and 2 other maids were helping too. The kitchen became an organized anthill. All morning, Mary didn't see Edward. Mrs. Higgins mentioned he was out in the barns, overseeing the livestock and winter chores. But in the middle of the afternoon, he appeared again. He entered the kitchen with boots muddy from red clay, hat in hand, his flannel shirt dampened with sweat despite the cold. He asked for cold water. Mrs. Higgins served him in a large glass. He drank it all at once, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, and thanked her. That was when his eyes met Mary's again. She was near the stove, stirring a huge copper pot of apple butter. The steam rose and left her face flushed and glistening. She noticed his gaze and felt her cheeks grow even hotter. She lowered her eyes quickly, but Edward didn't look away. He stood there, watching her stir the pot, with an expression Mary couldn't decipher. "How is the work coming along?" he asked suddenly. "Are you managing to keep up with the pace?" Mary said yes, in a voice almost inaudible. Edward nodded. "Mrs. Higgins says you are very good at what you do," he continued. "It's rare to find someone who takes pride in their work these days." Mary didn't know how to respond. She wasn't used to compliments. In fact, she couldn't remember the last time someone had said something kind about her. She murmured a shy thank you. Edward stayed there a moment longer, as if he wanted to say something else, but in the end he just nodded and left. Mrs. Higgins had a small smile at the corner of her mouth when Mary looked up. The girl pretended not to see and went back to stirring the apple butter with even more attention. Evening fell. The work continued. Mary was tired but satisfied. She liked being there. She liked having something to do. She liked feeling useful, that her hands produced good things. It was different from working at her father's house, where everything she did was received as an obligation, never as merit. When it got dark, Mrs. Higgins finally signaled a break. They ate dinner in the kitchen again. Afterward, the housekeeper called Mary to sit on the back porch while they drank tea. The night was cold and starry. The sky was clear, infinite, dotted with points of light. The smell of pine smoke drifted from the chimney. Mrs. Higgins asked where Mary came from, how she had heard about the job. Mary told her little. She said only that she was from Cedarville, that she'd been left without family recently, that she needed work. She didn't go into details. She didn't talk about the rejection. She didn't talk about the forced marriage. She didn't talk about the pain. Some wounds were too deep to be shown right away, but Mrs. Higgins was an experienced woman. She knew silences. She knew what wasn't said. She looked at Mary with understanding eyes and said only that she was welcome there. That in this house nobody judged anyone. That Mr. Edward was a good, fair man who treated his employees with respect. That she would be safe there. Those simple words touched Mary in a profound way. She felt her eyes sting, but blinked rapidly to hold back the tears. She thanked her with a choked voice. Mrs. Higgins touched her hand lightly, a maternal gesture Mary had never received before, and said it was time to rest. Mary went back to the little room. She lay on the bed and looked at the dark wooden ceiling. She thought about how strange life was. 3 days ago, she was being thrown out of her house. Now she was on a beautiful farm, working on a Christmas feast, being treated with kindness. She thought about the widowed farmer with the sad eyes. She thought about the dead wife he still mourned 3 years later. She thought about how some people loved so much that the loss destroyed them completely. She had never loved anyone like that. She had never been loved like that. She didn't know what it was like to feel something so strong that the absence became unbearable. She had spent her whole life just trying to survive, trying not to be noticed too much, trying not to be a burden, but a small part of her, a part she tried to suffocate, wondered what it would be like to be loved that way. What it would be like to matter so much to someone that your absence left a hole. Mary turned on her side and hugged the pillow. Exhaustion finally won, and she slept. She slept deeply. She slept without dreams. She slept like she hadn't slept in a long time. The next day was Christmas Eve, the day of the feast. Mary woke before the sun rose with Mrs. Higgins knocking on the door. The work would be brutal. They had to roast the hams and the turkeys, prepare all the side dishes, finish the desserts, set up the tables in the large barn behind the house. The entire farm was in motion. Mary worked non-stop. Her hands peeled, chopped, seasoned, stirred, baked. Mrs. Higgins commanded everything with military efficiency. Josie and the other maids ran from one side to the other. Farmhands set up long tables in the barn. Others hung kerosene lanterns. Still others brought benches and chairs borrowed from town. By mid-afternoon, the kitchen was organized chaos. Pots boiling, ovens hissing, the intoxicating smell of food everywhere. Mary was taking a huge tray of gingerbread from the oven when she heard the voice behind her. "I need to speak with you." She turned and was startled to see Edward standing there. He was clean now, shaved, wearing a white shirt and dark trousers. He looked different, still sad, but more presentable, more dignified. Mary placed the tray on the table and waited, confused. Edward looked around. The kitchen was full of people. He motioned for her to follow him. Mary looked at Mrs. Higgins, asking for silent permission. The housekeeper nodded yes. Mary dried her hands on her apron and followed Edward down the hallway through the foyer to the front porch. He stopped near the railing and stood with his back to her for a moment, looking down the avenue of oaks. Mary waited with her heart racing. She didn't know if she had done something wrong. She didn't know if she was going to be fired. She didn't know anything. Edward finally turned. His eyes met hers, and this time he didn't look away. "Mrs. Higgins told me you have nowhere to go after the feast," he said in a measured voice, "that you are alone, that you have no family." Mary felt her cheeks burn with shame. She lowered her eyes and confirmed it was true. Edward was silent for a moment. Then he made a proposal she never expected. "If you want to stay here working, you can stay, not as temporary help, as a permanent employee. The house is big and there is always work. Mrs. Higgins is getting old and tired. She needs help. The pay isn't much, but there is a roof, food, and you would be treated with respect." Mary raised her eyes so fast she felt dizzy. She looked at him in disbelief. Edward maintained a serious expression, but there was something softer there. Something that wasn't there before. "You work well," he continued. "You are dedicated. You are discreet. It would be good to have you here." Mary felt something explode inside her chest. It was relief, gratitude, hope, all together. She managed only to murmur that she accepted, that she thanked him, that she would do the best work possible. Edward nodded, and for the first time she saw something that almost looked like a smile. Almost, just the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. But it was something. It was more than the total sadness she saw before. "Then it is decided," he said. "After the feast, we will settle the details. Now you better get back to the kitchen before Mrs. Higgins kills me for stealing her best helper." Mary smiled. It was a small, shy smile, but genuine. Her first real smile in days. She thanked him again and went back inside, almost floating. Edward stayed on the porch watching her go. And something inside him, something that had been dead for 3 years, gave a small tremor, a small sign of life. Night fell, and with it came the magic of Christmas. The barn was transformed, the long tables covered with white cloths, the hanging lanterns casting a golden, dancing light, pine boughs and holly decorating every corner, and the food, so much food that the tables seemed to bow under the weight. Golden, crispy roast ham, huge stuffed turkeys, Platters of steaming mashed potatoes, pots of green beans, cornbread dressing of all kinds, colourful salads and the sweets, cakes, pies, cookies, puddings. People started to arrive, whole families, farm workers with wives and children, people from town, old folks, children, all dressed in the best clothes they had, all with expressions of joy and gratitude. Mary watched everything from the kitchen door, moved. Edward was at the entrance of the barn, greeting each person. Shaking hands, greeting by name, asking about families. He was polite, attentive, but Mary saw that he was doing it mechanically, like a duty, like a promise he needed to keep. There was no real joy there, just obligation. When everyone was seated, Edward asked for silence. His deep voice echoed through the barn. He said it was an honor to have them there another year, that this feast was in memory of his wife Isabel, who loved Christmas more than any other date, that she always said Christmas was a time to share, to welcome, to remember that no one should be alone, that he would continue doing this as long as he lived, keeping her memory alive. There was a respectful silence. Then the priest from town led a prayer. Following that, they began to sing Christmas carols. The voices mingled, some in tune, others not so much, but all full of fervor and emotion. Mary felt something tighten in her throat. For the first time in her life, she was present at a real Christmas celebration, not as an intruder, not as a shadow, but as part of it. The feast began. People served themselves with joy and reverence. They ate, talked, laughed. Children ran between the tables. Old folks told stories. It was a party. It was life. It was exactly what Christmas was supposed to be. Mary and the other maids worked non-stop, refilling platters, bringing more food, serving drinks. But Mrs. Higgins insisted that they all stop for a few minutes to eat too. They sat in a corner and tasted everything they had prepared. Mary ate slowly, savouring. Every forkful was a victory. It was proof that she had value, that her hands created good things. That was when she saw Edward approaching. He was coming straight to where she was. Mary stood up quickly, thinking he needed something. But he just said he wanted to thank her personally for the work, that everything was perfect, that Isabel would be proud. Mary said it wasn't just her, that Mrs. Higgins and the others had also worked hard. Edward agreed, but kept his eyes on her. "There is something different about you," he said suddenly. "I can't explain it, but there is." Mary didn't know what to answer. She felt her face heat up. Edward seemed to realize he had made her uncomfortable and changed the subject. He asked if she was enjoying the party. Mary said yes, that she had never seen anything so beautiful. Edward looked around at all those happy people, and for the first time his expression seemed to truly soften. "Isabel dreamed of this," he said in a low voice. "She dreamed of hosting a feast that welcomed everyone, that no one would be left alone on Christmas. She was like that, too big for the world." Mary felt his pain as if it were her own. She said his wife must have been a wonderful woman. Edward confirmed she was. "The best person I ever knew." And for the first time, Mary saw tears in his eyes. Tears he blinked rapidly to hide. But Mary saw, and she understood. She understood that this man was still bleeding on the inside, that the loss was still an open wound, that the love he felt hadn't fit into 3 years of mourning. Someone called for Edward. He excused himself and walked away. Mary stood there with her heart clenched. She wanted to do something, wanted to say something, but she didn't know what, so she just went back to work. The party went on into the night. After the food, there was music. Some men brought fiddles and guitars. They started to play bluegrass tunes. Some couples danced. Children played. Old folks clapped their hands to the rhythm. It was pure joy. Mary was collecting empty plates when she saw something that made her stop. Edward was sitting alone in a corner of the barn, away from the party. He was watching everything with a distant expression. There was an empty chair beside him. Mary realized he had left that chair empty on purpose. It was Isabel's place, the place she would never occupy again. And Edward guarded that space as if his wife might still arrive at any moment. The sadness Mary felt was so intense it almost physically hurt. She knew loneliness. She knew rejection. But this was different. This was love transformed into a prison. It was devotion transformed into suffering. Edward was alive but not living, existing but not feeling, breathing but having no more dreams. Mary looked away and continued working. The party began to wind down near midnight. Families said their goodbyes, offering thanks. Children left sleepy in their father's arms. Old folks left shuffling tired feet, but with smiles on their faces. Edward stood at the door saying goodbye to each one, maintaining the posture of a host until the last guest left. When everyone had gone, silence fell over the farm. Mary and the other maids began to clean. It was heavy work, but no one complained. Mrs. Higgins led the effort efficiently. They gathered plates, washed pots, put away leftovers, swept the floor. It took hours. When they finished, it was past 3 in the morning. Christmas Day had already arrived. Mary went back to the little room exhausted. She took off her sweaty dress, put on her nightgown, and fell into bed. But sleep didn't come quickly. She lay thinking about everything that had happened in the last few days. She thought about how she left home with nothing. She thought about how she arrived there with fear and despair. She thought about how now she had a steady job, a place to stay, a chance to start over. She thought about Edward. She thought about his sad eyes. She thought about the empty chair. She thought about the dead wife who still occupied every corner of that house, every corner of his heart. She thought that perhaps some losses were too big. Perhaps some people really never recovered. Perhaps Edward was one of those people. But a small part of her, a part she barely dared to admit, wondered if it would be possible, if it would be possible for that man to one day smile for real again. If it would be possible for those eyes to one day lose their sadness. If it would be possible. Mary shook her head. What an absurd idea. She was a nobody. She was the reject, the one nobody wanted. What right did she have to think these things? What right did she have to even imagine she could mean something to someone like him? She turned on her side and forced her eyes to close. She needed to sleep. She needed to stop thinking. She needed to just be grateful for what she had gained. A place to stay, a job, a chance. But as sleep finally came, the last image that passed through her mind was that one. Edward sitting alone looking at the empty chair, and Mary wondering if one day someone would manage to break him out of that prison, and asking herself why her heart hurt so much just thinking about it. Christmas dawned silent at Hope Valley Farm. Mary woke up late, her body aching from the intense work of the last few days. The light coming through the small bedroom window was different, softer, golden, in a way only late December has. She lay there for a few minutes, looking at the wooden ceiling, trying to organize her thoughts. It was Christmas Day, the first Christmas of her life that she didn't wake up with fear or sadness. It was strange. It was good. She got up slowly, dressed with care, pinned up her hair. When she left the room, the house was in an unusual silence. The kitchen, which in recent days had been an anthill, was now empty and clean. Copper pots shone, hanging on the walls. The iron stove was cold. On the long table, there was only a note left by Mrs. Higgins. The note said the housekeeper had gone to spend Christmas Day with her sister in town and would return the next day, that Mary should rest, that she had worked hard, that there was food stored in the pantry if she felt hungry, and that the master was also resting and should not be disturbed unless it was urgent. Mary folded the note slowly. The house was so quiet she could hear her own heart beating. There was something lonely about all that silence, something that reminded her too much of the Christmases she spent locked in the kitchen of her father's house while the family celebrated in the parlor. But at the same time, it was different. Here she wasn't a prisoner. Here she had a choice. She made a simple coffee and sat at the kitchen table. She ate bread with butter and some preserves left over from the feast. She drank the hot coffee in small sips. Through the window, she saw the sunlit orchard, the bare trees, the birds hopping from branch to branch. It was beautiful. It was peace. It was something she never had before. After eating, Mary decided to go out to get to know the farm better. In the last few days, she had been confined between the kitchen and the little room. She hadn't had time to explore. Now, with the day free, she felt curious. She went out the back door and walked through the orchard. Even in winter, there was a stark beauty to the dormant trees. Further on, there was a large chicken coop with dozens of hens scratching and clucking. A red and gold rooster crowed atop the perch. There was also a pig pen where huge pigs slept in the winter sun. Mary kept walking. She passed the barns where they kept tools, sacks of feed, supplies. She passed the cattle pens where some cows ruminated slowly, their breath misting in the cold air. She passed the workers' houses, small but well kept, with porches where firewood was stacked high. The farm was big, organized, prosperous. You could see that Edward was a man who knew how to manage, who took good care of things and people. That was when she saw the chapel. It was small, built on a rise not far from the main house, white-clapboard walls, a shingled roof, a simple wooden cross on top. Mary walked up the stone path that led to it. The chapel door was ajar. She hesitated. She wasn't a very religious woman. She grew up hearing that God had punished her by taking her mother. She grew up thinking she didn't deserve divine blessings. But something pulled her inside. Maybe curiosity, maybe the need for silence, maybe just respect for tradition. She entered slowly. The interior of the chapel was simple but beautiful, wooden pews on each side, a small altar with a white embroidered cloth. A simple wooden cross in the center, fresh holly and pine boughs at the base. Lit candles flickered, casting shadows on the walls, and sitting in the front pew, with his back to the entrance, was Edward. Mary stopped immediately, not knowing if she should leave or stay. But before she could decide, Edward turned his head. His eyes met hers. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Then he made a gesture indicating the pew beside him. "You can sit," he said in a low voice. "I won't bite." Mary advanced slowly and sat, maintaining a respectful distance. The silence returned. It wasn't uncomfortable, but it was heavy, loaded with unspoken things. Mary looked at the cross and tried to think of a prayer, but she couldn't. The words didn't come. "I come here every Christmas Day," Edward said suddenly. "I spend the whole morning here. It's the only place where I can feel her close." Mary understood he was talking about Isabel. She said nothing, just waited. Edward continued speaking, his voice low but steady. "She died on the road coming back from the Christmas Eve service in town. The carriage overturned. The horse got spooked by a varmint. It all happened so fast. When they came to tell me, she was already gone. I didn't even have a chance to say goodbye. Didn't even have a chance to say I loved her one more time." The pain in his voice was so raw, Mary felt her eyes sting. She didn't know what to say. What words could soothe something like that? She murmured only that she was so sorry. Edward made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh or a cry. "Everyone says that," he commented. "Everyone is sorry. But nobody understands. Nobody knows what it is to wake up every day and remember she isn't here anymore. That she will never be here again." Mary took a deep breath. She found courage she didn't know she had, and said that perhaps she didn't understand exactly that pain, but she understood loss. She understood loneliness, that she spent her whole life missing someone she never met, the mother who died when she was born, and that she also spent her life hearing she was guilty of that death. Edward turned his head to her, truly looking for the first time. Mary continued. She told him about her childhood, about her father's rejection, about the cruel stepmother, about the years being treated like a shadow in her own home, about the forced marriage she refused, about being thrown onto the street 3 days before Christmas with nothing. The words came out in a flow she couldn't stop, words she had never said aloud to anyone. When she finished, there were tears running down her face, tears she didn't realize were falling. Edward continued looking at her with a different expression. It wasn't pity, it was something deeper, it was recognition. It was seeing in the other the same wound he carried. "I knew there was something about you," he said finally. "Something I recognized as soon as I saw you. Now I know what it is. You carry a burden too. You bleed on the inside too." Mary wiped the tears with the back of her hand. She apologized for venting like that, for bothering him with her problems. Edward shook his head. "Don't apologize. It does good to share the weight sometimes. God knows I never shared mine with anyone. Maybe that's why it's still so heavy." They fell silent again. But it was a different silence now. It was a silence of understanding, of two castaways who found each other in the open sea. Edward looked back at the cross. "Isabel was everything to me," he said in a low voice. "We met when I was 18 and she was 17. Married a year later. It was 15 years of marriage. 15 years of happiness I didn't deserve. She was too good, too pure, and I always knew I wasn't worthy of her. When she died, I was sure it was punishment, for me not being a better man." Mary felt something tighten inside her chest. She said he couldn't think like that accidents happened, that it wasn't his fault. Edward gave a bitter smile. The head knows that, but the heart doesn't accept it. The heart still looks for her in every corner of the house, still expects her to walk through the door, still hears her voice in the wind. Mary looked at him and saw the completely broken man, saw that 3 years hadn't healed anything, that the wound remained open, bleeding, infected. And for the first time, she wondered if Edward really wanted to heal, if he wasn't, in some twisted way, comfortable in that pain, if he wasn't using grief as a prison he built himself. The church bells from town rang in the distance, marking noon. Edward stood up. "I need to go," he said. "I have to tend to the horses. Nobody's working today, so I do it myself." Mary stood up too, offered to help. Edward looked at her surprised. "You don't need to work today. It's a holiday." Mary shrugged. "I have nothing else to do, and I like horses. Never had the chance to care for one." Edward hesitated, then nodded. "Let's go then." They left the chapel together and walked to the stable. It was a large, airy building with spacious stalls on each side. There were 5 horses, 2 bays, a black, a painted one, and a white one beautiful as snow. Edward explained the name of each one. The white one was named Misty. It was Isabel's horse. "Nobody has ridden her since she died," Edward explained with a heavy voice. "She just stays here in the stable. I can't sell or donate her. I know it's foolish, but I can't." Mary approached Misty's stall slowly. The horse raised her head and looked at her with large, gentle eyes. She extended her hand slowly. Misty sniffed, then touched her velvet nose to Mary's palm. It was warm and soft. Mary smiled. "She is beautiful," she said. "Isabel had good taste." Edward stood watching the scene with a strange expression. "She loved that horse more than anything except me," he said. "Spent hours here talking to her. Said Misty understood her better than most people." They began to work. Edward showed her how to prepare the feed, how to change the water, how to brush the horses. Mary paid attention to every detail. She liked it. She liked the smell of hay and leather. She liked the sound of horses crunching their grain. She liked the feeling of doing something useful. They worked side by side for almost 2 hours, at first in silence. Then Edward started talking. He told her about the farm, about how he inherited it from his father who died 10 years earlier, about how he built everything the way it was now, about the good harvests and the bad, about the workers who became almost family. He spoke with contained pride, with love for what he had built. Mary listened, fascinated. She asked questions. Edward answered, and little by little the conversation flowed more naturally. He asked about her childhood. Mary told him more. Told him about how she learned to cook on her own, how she learned to sew, patching her own clothes, how she learned to read in secret, using her step-siblings' books. Edward listened with genuine attention. "You are stronger than you imagine," he said at a certain moment. "To survive what you survived and still keep goodness in your heart is a kind of strength few people have." The words touched Mary deeply. No one had ever called her strong. She was always the weak one, the pathetic one, the one who needed to be tolerated. But Edward saw something different, saw something she herself didn't know she had. When they finished, the sun was already high in the sky. Edward suggested they have lunch. They went back to the house. Mary prepared something simple with the leftovers from the feast. Rice, beans, sliced roast ham, salad. They ate in the kitchen, sitting at the long table. It was strange. It was intimate. It was a breach of protocol between master and servant. But neither of them mentioned it. If you are enjoying this story, leave a like on the video and share it with someone who also likes emotional stories. It helps the channel grow a lot. After lunch, Edward said he needed to take inventory of the pantry, check supplies, note down what needed to be bought on the next trip to town. He invited Mary to help. She accepted. They spent the whole afternoon at it. Edward dictated the items. Mary wrote them down in a notebook with neat handwriting. He noticed she wrote well and commented. Mary explained she learned on her own, reading in secret. Edward was impressed. He said she could help more with the administrative part of the farm if she wanted. Mrs. Higgins didn't read very well, and he needed someone to organize the accounts. Mary felt pride swell in her chest. She said she would love to help. Edward smiled. It was a small smile, but it was a smile. The second Mary saw on him. The second in 3 years, perhaps. The day passed. They worked together, talked, laughed a few times at small things, and when the sun began to set, Mary realized it had been the best Christmas of her life, not because of a party or presents, but because of this, the company, the feeling of belonging, the look of someone who truly saw her. They had dinner together again. This time it was Edward who cooked. He made scrambled eggs with sausage and toast. It was simple but good. He told her he learned to cook after Isabel died. In the first months, he couldn't eat anything other people prepared. He had a constant lump in his throat, so he learned to make the basics to survive. Mary said she understood that sometimes we needed to do things alone to be able to endure. Edward agreed, looking into her eyes. "You really do understand," he said. "It's rare to find someone who understands without needing too much explanation." After dinner, Edward invited Mary to sit on the porch. The night was beautiful, clear sky full of stars, air crisp and clean. They sat in rocking chairs and looked into the dark. The silence was comfortable now. It was Edward who broke the silence. "Mary, can I ask you something?" She said yes. He hesitated. "Do you regret it? Refusing the marriage? Losing everything?" Mary thought before answering. "No," she said finally. "I don't regret it. For the first time in my life I chose. I chose my own life, even without knowing what would happen, even with fear. But it was my choice. That is worth more than any security." Edward fell silent, processing that. Then he said he admired her, that he admired the courage, that he never had the courage to choose anything after Isabel died, just let life happen, just fulfilled obligations, just existed. Mary looked at him. The light coming from the house illuminated half his face, half in light, half in shadow. She said it was never too late to choose, that he still had life ahead of him, that Isabel wouldn't want to see him like this, tied to the past, dead in life. Edward took a deep breath. I know that. The head knows, but the heart still doesn't accept. I feel like it would be betrayal. I feel like if I move on, I will be abandoning her. Mary felt courage grow inside her. She said that loving someone wasn't binding oneself eternally to the pain of loss. That loving was honoring the memory by living well, living fully. That certainly Isabel, being the good woman she was, would want to see him happy again. Edward turned his head to her. His eyes shone in the gloom. You speak as if you knew her, he said with a choked voice. Mary replied that she didn't know her, but she knew love. Even never having been loved that way, she knew. She knew that true love wants the good of the other, always, even after death. A tear rolled down Edward's face, just one. He didn't wipe it, let it fall. Mary felt the urge to reach out her hand, to touch him, to offer comfort. But she didn't dare. There was still distance between them. Distance of class, of position, of different worlds. Edward stood up, said it was late, that he needed to sleep, thanked her for the company, thanked her for the words, said it did good to really talk to someone. Mary stood up too, wished him good night. Their eyes met for a long instant. There was something there, something new, something neither of them knew how to name yet. The following days fell into a new routine. Mrs. Higgins returned and was surprised to learn that Mary was now permanent staff. But it was a good surprise. The housekeeper really needed help and liked the girl. They worked well together. Mary took over part of the kitchen and part of the administration. In the morning, she helped Mrs. Higgins with meals and house care. In the afternoon, she went to the farm office to help Edward with accounts, records, correspondence. She discovered she had a talent for numbers. Edward was impressed with how quickly she learned. They spent hours together in that office, Edward teaching, Mary learning, but also talking. Every day he opened up a little more, told stories from the past, stories of the farm, stories of Isabel. Mary listened to everything. And little by little she got to know the woman he loved, knowing her through his memories. Isabel was painted as a perfect woman, kind, generous, joyful, loved music, flowers, animals, dreamed of having children but couldn't. Suffered 3 miscarriages that broke her heart and Edward's. In the last one, the doctors said she couldn't try again. It was a pain they both carried, but faced together. Mary caught herself feeling strange jealousies, not of Isabel exactly, but of her memory, of her perfection. How could she compete with a perfect memory? How could she even think of... She stopped the thought in the middle. What an absurd idea. She was a servant. He was the master. She was a common woman, without value, rejected. He was a dignified man, a landowner, still in love with his dead wife. There was no room for anything beyond respect and friendship, but the heart didn't listen to reason. The heart beat faster every time Edward entered the room. The heart warmed every time he smiled. The heart ached every time he spoke of Isabel with all that devotion. Mary tried to suffocate those feelings, but they grew, like weeds grow where they aren't invited. A week passed, then 2. January arrived cold and bleak, but inside the farmhouse it was warm. The farm was in the quiet season, but there was always work. Edward spent days checking fences and preparing for spring planting. He came back late, tired, cold, but he always came to eat dinner in the kitchen, always talked to Mary, always asked how her day was. Mrs. Higgins noticed everything. The housekeeper wasn't a fool. She saw the looks that lingered too long, saw the smiles that came easier, saw the light slowly returning to Edward's eyes, and saw the shy happiness in Mary's eyes. but she didn't comment on anything, just observed, and prayed softly that God would have mercy on those two wounded souls. It was on a late January afternoon that everything changed. Mary was in the office organizing invoices when Edward entered. He carried a wooden box in his hands. He had a strange expression, a mixture of pain and something else. "I found this today in her room," he said, placing the box on the desk. "It was tucked away in the back of the closet. I never had the courage to go through her things. But today I decided to start clearing out, to make the donation I've been putting off for 3 years, and I found this." Mary looked at the box. It was simple, aged wood, with a small lock. Edward took a key from his pocket and opened it. Inside were letters, many letters, all with a woman's delicate and neat handwriting. "These are letters Isabel wrote," Edward explained with a trembling voice. "But they weren't sent to anyone. They are letters to me, to be read after her death." Mary felt her heart freeze. Edward took out one of the letters with shaking hands. He began to read aloud. His voice cracked now and then, but he continued. The letter said, "My beloved Edward, if you are reading this, it is because I am no longer by your side. I know you must be suffering. I know your heart. I know how deeply you love. I know the pain must be terrible. But I need you to know something very important. I do not want you to bind yourself to my memory. I do not want you to spend the rest of your life in mourning. I do not want you to close your heart to love. You are a good man, a man who deserves to be happy, deserves to have companionship, deserves to have a family. And I, wherever I am, will want to see you living fully, not surviving, living. Promise me you will try. Promise me you won't betray me by not living. Promise me you will honor what we had by being happy again. With all my eternal love, Isabel." The silence that fell was absolute. Edward had tears running down his face. Mary, too. The letter was beautiful. It was liberation. It was permission. It was love so big it transcended death. Edward took out another letter, then another, all saying similar things. Isabel asking him to move on, asking him to find love again, asking him to be happy, saying that this would be the greatest gift he could give her memory. Edward put down the letters and covered his face with his hands. He sobbed, deep sobs that came from an old closed-off place. Mary didn't think, just acted. She stood up and went to him, put her hand on his shoulder. He didn't pull away. On the contrary, he turned and hugged her hard, tight, like someone drowning finding a lifeline. Mary hugged him back, felt his large body shake, felt his tears wetting her shoulder, felt his pain leaking from every pore, and she just held on, just offered presence, just became a safe harbor in that storm. They stayed like that for a time that seemed like an eternity. When Edward finally pulled away, his eyes were red, but there was something different in them, something like relief, like release. "She knew," he said with a hoarse voice. "Isabel knew I would trap myself, that I would punish myself. That's why she left these letters. That's why she tried to free me even after death." Mary wiped her own tears, said Isabel was a wise woman, that she loved him enough to want his happiness above anything else. Edward looked at Mary with new intensity. "You remind me of her," he whispered. "Not in looks, but in essence, in goodness, in the capacity to see beyond the surface." Mary felt her face burn. She didn't know what to say. Edward took her hand. It was a simple gesture, but loaded with meaning. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you for not judging me. You brought something to this house that was dead for 3 years. You brought life." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, something electric, something inevitable. Edward moved closer slowly. Mary didn't pull away. Their lips were inches apart when there was a knock on the door. Mrs. Higgins entered without waiting for an answer. She stopped in the doorway upon seeing the scene. The two separated quickly. The housekeeper pretended not to notice anything, said only that there was someone at the door asking for Mary. Mary's heart plummeted. "Who?" she asked, with a thin voice. Mrs. Higgins said it was a man, an old man who introduced himself as Franklin Carter, claimed to be her father. Mary went pale, felt her legs go weak. Edward noticed and held her arm. "What does he want?" he asked. Mary said she didn't know, but nothing good, that her father never did anything out of kindness in his life, that if he was there, it was to bring trouble. Edward said she didn't need to see him if she didn't want to, that he would send the man away, but Mary took a deep breath and said no, that she needed to face it, that she needed to end this once and for all. They went to the front porch. There stood Franklin Carter, a tall, gaunt man, face marked by time and drink, small, cruel eyes. Beside him was Mary's stepmother, a heavy-set woman with a bitter expression. And behind them, looking ashamed and sweaty despite the chill, was Jeremiah Tate, the man Mary refused to marry. Franklin looked at his daughter with poorly disguised contempt. "So this is where you tucked yourself away," he said with a rasping voice. "Thought you had died on the road, but no, here you are playing the little maid." Mary lifted her chin. "What do you want?" she asked with a voice firmer than she felt. Franklin spat on the ground. "I came to get you. Playtime is over. You're coming back home, and you're going to marry Jeremiah like you should have done from the start." Mary said she wasn't going, that she had already said that the answer hadn't changed. Franklin took a threatening step. "You don't have a choice, you ungrateful girl. You owe me everything. 24 years of food, roof, clothes. Everything you ate came from my table. Now it's time to pay the debt." Edward stepped in front of Mary. His posture was intimidating. Voice deep and firm when he spoke. "You are mistaken, sir. Your daughter owes you nothing. She worked her whole life in your house, receiving nothing in return. She paid any debt she thought she had. Now she works here and is under my protection. I suggest you leave." Franklin looked at Edward with hatred. "Who are you to interfere?" he asked. Edward introduced himself. "I am the owner of this farm, and you are on my property. Mary is of age and free to make her own choices. She chose to stay here, and I choose to protect her. Now leave before I call my men to remove you by force." Jeremiah took a step forward. "She is my promised bride," he said with a slurred voice. "We already paid the dowry to her father. She has to honor the commitment." Edward looked at him with poorly disguised disgust. "There is no commitment without consent, and she made it clear she does not consent. The money you paid her father is a problem between the two of you. She has nothing to do with it." The stepmother started to whine. "Mary, for the love of God, come back home. You are bringing shame to the family. What will the neighbors think?" Mary looked at the woman who mistreated her all her life and felt only pity. "I don't care what the neighbors think. I care about living my own life, something you never let me do." Franklin was red with rage. "You will regret this," he spat with hate. "You'll see what it is to starve, to freeze. You'll come crawling back begging to return, and when that happens I'll spit in your face." Mary felt tears burning but didn't let them fall. "I prefer to starve than go back to that house," she said with a trembling but firm voice. "I prefer to die of cold than live one more day being treated like trash. You never gave me love, never gave me respect, only gave me pain, and I owe nothing to anyone who only caused me suffering." The silence that followed was heavy. Franklin looked at his daughter with pure hatred. "You are no longer my daughter," he said, spitting the words. "To me, you are dead." Mary replied that to her he had died a long time ago, that she was just making it official now. Edward signaled and 3 farmhands appeared, big, strong men. "Escort these people to the gate," Edward ordered. "And if they come back, call the sheriff." Franklin, the stepmother, and Jeremiah were practically escorted out. But before leaving, Franklin shouted one last threat. "This isn't over. I'll make you regret it. I'll ruin you and this fancy farmer. You'll see." When they were gone, Mary collapsed. Her legs gave way. Edward caught her, took her inside, sat her in a chair. Mrs. Higgins brought water. Mary drank, trembling. The tears she had held back now fell freely. Edward knelt in front of her, held her hands, looked into her eyes. "You were brave," he said, with a firm but gentle voice. "You faced them. You chose your freedom. I am proud of you." Those words broke Mary. She sobbed, cried years of pain, of rejection, of loneliness, cried everything she had stored up, and Edward just held her hands, just stayed there, present, solid, real. When she finally calmed down, Edward said she didn't need to be afraid, that he wouldn't let anyone hurt her, that as long as she was at the farm, she would be safe. Mary thanked him with a hoarse voice, said she didn't know what she would have done without him there. Edward smiled, that small smile that was coming easier now. "You would have faced them alone. You are stronger than you think." Mrs. Higgins made calming tea. The three sat in the kitchen. The housekeeper said she knew men like Franklin, said he wouldn't give up easily, that he would probably try something else. Edward agreed, said he would double the watch, that he would warn the workers to be alert, that he wouldn't let anything happen. Mary felt protected in a way she never felt in her life. These people, whom she had known for little more than a month, cared more about her than her own family. It was strange and wonderful at the same time. Night fell. Mary went to her room, emotionally exhausted, lay in bed, but sleep didn't come. She lay thinking about everything, about her father, the threat, about Edward, the letters from Isabel, the almost kiss that was interrupted, his look, the feeling of his hands in hers. Something was changing, something was growing between them, something that scared and thrilled at the same time. Mary knew she shouldn't delude herself, knew he still loved Isabel, that he always would. But the letters had changed something, had given permission, had opened a door. And Mary, for the first time in her life, allowed herself to dream that maybe, just maybe, she could be loved, that she could mean something to someone, that she could have a life different from the one she always imagined. But along with hope came fear. Fear of getting hurt, fear of not being enough, fear of being just a substitute, fear that when the novelty wore off, Edward would realize she was just a common woman, nothing special, nothing that deserved to be chosen. Mary turned on her side, hugging the pillow, tried to push the thoughts away, tried to just sleep. But the image of those deep brown eyes wouldn't leave her head, and her heart, stubborn and foolish, kept beating hopefully inside her chest. The days that followed were of constant tension. Mary tried to maintain a normal routine, but fear was always there, latent like a hidden animal waiting for the moment to attack. Edward doubled the security as promised. Farmhands patrolled night and day. The doors were locked at dusk. No one entered without being announced. But the worst wasn't the fear of what Franklin might do. The worst was what was happening between her and Edward. Since the day of the letters, since the interrupted almost kiss, there was a different tension in the air. They continued working together, talking, but now there were loaded silences, glances that lasted too long, brushing of hands that seemed intentional. Mary didn't know what to do with the feelings growing inside her like a rising tide. She loved that man. She didn't know exactly when it happened, maybe from the first look, maybe from the first conversation in the chapel, maybe since he defended her from her father. But she loved him in a deep, frightening, total way, and the worst is that she saw signs. Saw that maybe, just maybe, he felt something too, saw it in the way he looked at her, in the way he smiled when she entered the room, in the way he always found an excuse to be close. But neither of them had the courage to speak. Neither of them had the courage to cross that line. Mrs. Higgins watched everything with eyes that had seen much of life. One afternoon, when they were alone in the kitchen preparing dinner, the housekeeper finally spoke. "Mary, can I give you an old woman's advice?" Mary stopped chopping vegetables and looked at her. The housekeeper continued, "Life is too short for us to let fear decide for us. If you feel something for the master, if he feels something for you, don't let it pass. Don't let what others will think, or what is socially right or wrong, steal the chance for you too to be happy." Mary felt her cheeks burn. She tried to deny it, but Mrs. Higgins shook her head. "No use denying, girl. I have eyes, I see. And I'll tell you one more thing. Mrs. Isabel would love you. She would love to see Edward happy again. Those letters made that clear. She doesn't want him trapped. She wants him to live." The words struck deep. Mary went back to chopping vegetables with tears blurring her vision. "But what if I'm not enough?" she whispered. "What if he realizes I'm nothing compared to her?" Mrs. Higgins went to her and held her face with both hands. "You don't need to be her. You need to be you. And you are more than enough. Any man with sense would see that." That conversation echoed in Mary's head for the following days. She tried to find courage, tried to imagine what it would be like to tell Edward what she felt, but whenever she thought about it, fear paralyzed her. Fear of rejection, fear of losing what she already had, fear of ruining everything. February arrived, bringing rain finally, the first freezing rains of the year after months of dry cold. The hard earth drank that water with infinite thirst. The winter wheat turned a brighter green. The world felt like it was waking up. It was on one of those rainy afternoons that everything changed for good. Mary was in the office organizing correspondence when Edward entered soaked. He had gone out to oversee the repair of a fence and got caught in the rain. He was dripping water everywhere, hair plastered to his forehead, shirt clinging to his body. Mrs. Higgins brought towels. Edward dried himself as he could but remained damp. Mary suggested he go change clothes before catching a cold. Edward said he would, but first needed to check something in the ledger books. He sat in the chair beside her, so close that Mary could feel the heat of his body, the smell of rain and earth. They worked in silence for a few minutes. The rain drummed on the roof, creating mesmerizing music. The office was in twilight, lit only by the lamp on the desk. It was intimate. It was dangerous. It was inevitable. Edward found what he was looking for in the books and closed the ledger. But he didn't get up. He sat there looking at Mary. She felt his gaze and raised her head. Their eyes met, and something in the air changed, became denser, heavier. "Mary," Edward said with a low voice, "I need to tell you something, but I'm afraid. Afraid of ruining what we have, afraid of being unfair to you, afraid of betraying her memory." Mary felt her heart race. She knew that moment was coming. She knew she needed to be brave. She took a deep breath and said he could speak, that she would listen, that she wouldn't judge. Edward ran a hand through his wet hair, a nervous gesture. "Since you arrived here, something changed in me, something I thought was dead. In the beginning, I tried to ignore it, tried to say it was just gratitude, just friendship, but it isn't. It's more, much more. When I'm near you, I feel I can breathe again. When you smile, I feel there is a reason to wake up. When you speak, I feel there is life beyond pain." Mary was breathless. Couldn't believe what she was hearing. Edward continued, the words coming out in a flow he could no longer hold back. "But I don't know if I have the right to feel this. I don't know if it's right. Isabel was the love of my life, and I promised myself I would never love anyone the way I loved her. But then you appeared and turned everything upside down." He stopped and looked into her eyes. His hands were trembling. I'm not asking for anything. I'm not expecting anything. I just needed you to know, needed to get this off my chest before it suffocated me." The silence that followed was absolute. Only the sound of the rain. Mary felt her chest tight, throat closed. All the words she wanted to say were stuck. But then she remembered what Mrs. Higgins said, that life was too short for fear to decide. She found courage she didn't know she had, and spoke. Her voice was low but firm. "Edward, I feel it too. I've felt it since the first day. I tried to deny it because I thought it was absurd. I am nobody and you are you, but I can't pretend anymore. You are the first person in my life who made me feel I matter, that I have value, that I deserve to be seen, and I love you. I love you in a way that scares me, in a way that hurts, in a way I don't know how to control." Edward stood paralyzed. Then, in a movement that seemed to happen in slow motion, he reached out and touched her face. The touch was soft, almost reverent. As if she were something precious that could break, Mary closed her eyes, feeling that touch go through her entirely. "You aren't nobody," Edward said with a hoarse voice. "You are everything. You are the light that returned to this house. You are the reason I was looking for to start living again. And I don't know how this will work. I don't know what people will say. I don't know if I'm doing right. But I know I don't want to live without you anymore." Then he pulled her to him. And this time there was no interruption. Their lips met in a kiss that was an explosion of feelings stored for so long. It was soft and desperate at the same time. It was promise and surrender. It was an end and a beginning. When they separated, both were breathless. Edward rested his forehead against hers, closed his eyes. "I don't know what I'm doing," he whispered. "I just know I can't fight this anymore." Mary touched his face. "Then don't fight. Just feel. Just live." They stayed like that for a time that seemed suspended. The rain continued outside. The world kept turning. But in that office, in that moment, only the two of them existed, two wounded souls who found a cure in each other. But the peace was short-lived. 3 days later, in the dead of night, the worst happened. Mary was sleeping when she woke up with the smell of smoke. She jumped out of bed, frightened, opened the bedroom door and saw smoke entering the hallway. She screamed, ran to the kitchen. There was fire in the woodshed attached to the kitchen. The flames were already licking the walls. The alarm was general. Edward woke up. Mrs. Higgins woke up. The workers woke up. Everyone ran with buckets of water, formed a human chain, passed buckets from hand to hand from the well to the fire. It took almost 2 hours to put it out. When they finally succeeded, the shed was destroyed. The kitchen was damaged, but it hadn't spread to the rest of the house. They saved most of it. Edward inspected everything when the sun rose, found what he was looking for, traces of kerosene, signs that the fire had been criminal. Someone had set it on purpose. The rage on his face was something Mary had never seen. He called the men, ordered a search of the entire property. They went to town to ask around, and they found out. Franklin had been seen prowling the farm the night before. One of the neighbors confirmed seeing him with a can that looked like kerosene. Edward didn't think twice. Saddled his horse and went to the sheriff's office in town, filed a report, denounced Franklin for attempted arson. The sheriff, who knew Edward and respected him, promised to investigate, sent deputies to Franklin's house. When they got there, they found the evidence, the kerosene can still half full, clothes smelling of smoke. Franklin tried to deny it, but couldn't. He was arrested, taken away in handcuffs, screaming that he would get revenge, that Mary would pay, that Edward would pay. But it did no good. He was arrested and would answer for the crime. Mary received the news with immense relief. Finally, she was free. Free from her father, free from the threats, free from the past. she cried. But they were tears of liberation. Edward hugged her, said no one would ever hurt her again, that he would take care of her for the rest of her life if she let him. And it was there, standing in the middle of the kitchen, damaged by the fire her father caused, that Edward knelt, held her hands, looked into her eyes, and asked the question that would change everything. "Mary Carter, will you accept to marry me? Not because you need protection, not because I feel pity, but because I love you, because you brought life back to me, because I can no longer imagine my future without you in it. If you are enjoying this story, don't forget to share it with someone special. These stories of true love need to be known." Mary couldn't speak. Tears ran free. She managed only to nod yes with her head. Edward stood up and kissed her, and for the first time it was a kiss without fear, without guilt, without shadows. It was a kiss of promise, of future, of true love. Mrs. Higgins watched everything from the doorway. She had tears in her eyes too. "Finally," she murmured, "finally he has returned to living." The wedding was set for April. 2 months to prepare everything, to fix the kitchen, to notify Edward's distant family, to make the dress, to organize the party. The news ran through the region like wildfire. Widowed farmer was going to marry again, and not some girl from a known family, but a servant, a poor girl, a renegade daughter. There was scandal. There was gossip. There were people who criticized, said Edward was dishonoring Isabel's memory, said Mary was an opportunist, said it wouldn't last, that it was madness. But there were also people who supported. The farm workers loved it. They knew Mary, knew she was good, knew she was hard-working, knew she had treated everyone with respect. Mrs. Higgins was the first to defend. Then others joined. The priest from town, Father Augustus, visited Edward to talk. But after hearing the whole story, gave his blessing, said God wanted people to be happy, that true love was rare and should be celebrated. The 2 months passed in a whirlwind. Mary had never been so happy. Woke up every day hardly believing it was real, that she was going to marry Edward, that she was going to be his wife, that she was going to have a family, that she was going to have a real home. Edward was also transformed. The workers commented among themselves. Never had seen the boss like that, smiling, whistling while he worked, making plans, talking about the future. It was as if a new man had been born from the ashes of the old. He took Mary to the room that had been Isabel's, the room he locked for 3 years, opened the shutters letting light and air enter, took out her clothes to donate, took out personal objects to store with care, but cleaned the space, made room for the new, said that would be their room, the couple's room. New beginning. Mary helped with respect and care, didn't want to erase Isabel, knew she would always be part of their history, but also knew there needed to be space for her, for the life they were building together. One afternoon, while organizing things, Mary found a portrait. It was Isabel, a beautiful woman with a sweet smile and kind eyes. Mary stood looking at that image for a long time. Edward approached and stood beside her. "She was beautiful," Mary said softly. "Seems to have been an incredible person," Edward agreed. "She was, and I will always love her, will always keep what we lived. But I learned that the heart has no limit. I don't need to stop loving her to love you. I can do both, and she would want that." Mary looked at him with tears in her eyes, said she understood, that she wasn't jealous of his past, that Isabel made him the man he was today, and she was grateful for that. Edward kissed her with tenderness. "You are special, you know that," he said. "Any other woman would be jealous, would have demanded I erase her, but you didn't. You honor her, and that makes me love you even more." They put the portrait in a drawer of the bedside table, not hidden, just kept with care, together with the letters, together with the good memories, part of the history, but no longer the center of it. Finally, The wedding day arrived. It was a Saturday in April, a beautiful day with blue sky and golden sun. The farm chapel was decorated with field flowers, roses, daisies, lilies. It smelled sweet and fresh. The pews were full. Farm workers with their families, people from town, Edward's friends, all dressed in their best clothes. Mary dressed in the room with help from Mrs. Higgins and Josie. The dress was simple but beautiful, fine white cotton with lace at the cuffs and collar. A light veil held with natural flowers in her hair. She looked at herself in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman she saw. It was her. But it was a version of her she never imagined existed. It was a happy version, loved, complete. When the time came, Mrs. Higgins took her to the chapel door. She had no father to give her away, had no family, but had that woman who became the mother she never had. Mrs. Higgins held her face with both hands. "You deserve all the happiness in this world, girl, and I am sure you will have it. Now go there and marry that stubborn man who finally learned to live again." The doors opened, the music started. It was guitar and violin playing an old and beautiful melody. Mary began to walk. Every step was a victory. Every step was overcoming. Every step was proof that she had value, that she deserved to be loved, that she deserved to be chosen. Edward was at the altar, wearing an impeccable dark suit, hair combed, beard trimmed. But what drew most attention was the smile. Open, true smile that lit up his whole face. When he saw Mary, his eyes filled with tears. She was beautiful. But more than that, she was there. She was choosing him. She was saying yes to their future. Father Augustus conducted the ceremony with a firm and affectionate voice, spoke about love, about overcoming, about second chances, about how God works in mysterious ways, but always for the good of those who have faith. Asked Edward and Mary to say their vows. Edward went first. Took Mary's hands and spoke, looking into her eyes. "Mary, I spent 3 years dead in life. Thought I had buried my heart along with Isabel. Thought I would never feel joy again. But you proved I was wrong. You brought light to the dark, brought life to the dead, brought hope to the desperate. I promise to love you every day of my life, promise to protect you, promise to respect you, promise to make you happy the way you made me happy. You are my second chance, and I won't waste it." Mary was crying, but they were happy tears. Her turn came, took a deep breath and spoke. "Edward, I spent 24 years thinking I had no value, thinking I didn't deserve to be loved, thinking I was born just to suffer. But you showed me I was wrong. You saw me, truly, saw beyond appearance, beyond social position, beyond what others said. You saw me and chose me. That is a gift I will never be able to repay completely. But I will try. I will love you with everything I have. We'll take care of you. We'll honor the memory of who came before me, and we'll build with you a new life, a life full of love, respect, joy. You saved me, and now I choose to save you back. Every day, for the rest of my life." There wasn't a dry eye in the chapel. Even the toughest men wiped away tears disguisedly. Father Augustus declared that by the power God granted him and the authority of the Holy Church, he declared them husband and wife. He could kiss the bride. Edward didn't need to hear twice, pulled Mary to him and kissed her. It was a deep, passionate kiss, full of promise. The chapel exploded in applause and cheers. Music played, bells rang. It was a party. It was joy. It was love winning. The reception was in the same barn where the Christmas feast happened, but now it was decorated differently. Flowers everywhere, colorful ribbons hanging, tables full of food and drink. There was music, dancing, laughter. It was a celebration that lasted until dawn. Mary and Edward circulated among the guests, received congratulations, received hugs, received blessings. And for the first time, Mary felt part of a community, part of something bigger, was no longer the rejected one. She was the farmer's wife, was the lady of Hope Valley Farm, was someone. When the night was already late, Edward took her outside. They walked down the avenue of oaks under the moonlight, sat on a stone bench in the garden. The sound of the party came muffled in the distance. They stayed in silence for a moment, just appreciating the peace, the happiness, the completeness. "Are you happy?" Edward asked, holding her hand. Mary turned and smiled. "More than I ever imagined possible." Edward pulled her close, kissed her forehead. "Then my mission is accomplished, because all I want for the rest of my life is to keep making you happy." Mary leaned her head on his shoulder, looked at the stars, thought about everything that happened, how she arrived there with nothing, how she was rejected, expelled, thrown away, how she thought she would die alone and forgotten. But then came to Hope Valley Farm, and the name of the farm proved prophetic. Here she found hope, found life, found love she thought she would never have. Months passed. Married life was everything they dreamed and more. Edward was an attentive, affectionate husband, a partner. Mary was a dedicated, loving wife, a companion. They worked together on the farm, cared for the land, cared for the workers, cared for each other. The community that criticized in the beginning little by little accepted. There was no denying it. The couple was happy. The farm prospered. The workers were treated well. Mary won respect with work, kindness, humility. Edward won admiration for having the courage to follow his heart, even against social conventions. Mary transformed the tradition of the Christmas feast. Now it wasn't just in memory of Isabel. It was in memory of her and in celebration of the new family. Every Christmas the farm received not only workers and the needy, but also women going through situations similar to what she went through. Rejected women, women without family, women who needed a second chance. Edward supported completely. They built an annex on the farm, a house with several rooms. It became a temporary shelter, a place where these women could stay while they recovered, learned trades, gained strength to start over. Mary coordinated everything, taught cooking, sewing, gardening, gave them what she never had: support, love, a chance. The news spread. People from neighboring towns started sending women to Hope Valley Farm. The place gained fame, gained recognition. Even the state governor sent a letter of thanks for the social work they were doing. A year after the wedding, in April 1944, Mary discovered she was pregnant. The news was received with an explosion of joy. Edward cried because he always wanted to be a father, cried because Isabel couldn't give him that, cried because now God was giving a second chance at this too. Mary cried too, cried because she was going to have a child, was going to be a mother, was going to be able to give her child everything she never had: unconditional love, acceptance, security. Was going to break the cycle of rejection that marked her childhood. The pregnancy was peaceful. Mary worked as much as she could, then rested, was surrounded by care. Edward barely let her make an effort. Mrs. Higgins prepared special foods. The women from the shelter helped with everything. It was the family she built, family that chose her as much as she chose them. In December 1944, exactly 2 years after she arrived at the farm, Mary went into labor. It was long and difficult. But when she finally heard the first cry of the baby, everything was worth it. It was a boy, healthy, strong, beautiful. Edward held his son in his arms and cried like a child. "Thank you," he repeated to Mary. "Thank you for giving me this. Thank you for giving me a family again. Thank you for giving me life again." They named the boy Gabriel, Angel of the Annunciation, Angel who brings good news, because he was good news, was proof of a new beginning, was proof that love wins. That second chances exist, that it is worth having courage. The christening was big, the farm chapel was packed again. Father Augustus conducted the ceremony. Mrs. Higgins was the godmother. One of the oldest workers was the godfather. It was a beautiful party with lots of food, music, joy. It was a celebration not only of Gabriel's birth, but of the family that was formed, of the community that grew, of the love that overcame all obstacles. Years passed. Gabriel grew strong and happy. After him came two more children, a girl they named Belle, in honor of Edward's first wife, and another boy they named Peter. The house became full of life, noise, joy. It was everything Edward always wanted. It was everything Mary never dared to dream. Franklin died in prison 3 years after being sentenced. Mary received the news without joy, but also without sadness. Just felt peace, felt that chapter had finally been closed for good. Didn't go to the funeral, didn't cry, just moved on, because she had too much life ahead to look back. Hope Valley Farm became an example in the region, example of prosperity, of social justice, of love for one's neighbor. Edward and Mary were respected by all, not because of money or position, but because of character, of work, of genuine kindness. Mrs. Higgins lived until she was 80, died in peace at the farm, surrounded by the family she helped create. At the funeral, Mary cried as if she had lost her own mother, because she had, the only mother she really had, the one who chose to love her when no one else wanted to. Years kept passing. Edward and Mary grew old together. Hair turned white. Faces gained wrinkles, bodies became slower, but the love never diminished. On the contrary, grew, matured, became deeper, stronger, truer. On cold winter nights, they sat on the porch swing, holding hands, looking at the stars, reminiscing, remembering how it all started, how they found each other at the exact moment they both needed, how they healed each other, how they built a beautiful life together. Edward always said Mary saved him, that if it weren't for her, he would have died trapped in grief. Mary always said it was Edward who saved her, that if it weren't for him, she would have died on the street with no one. But the truth was, they saved each other. Each gave the other exactly what was missing: love, acceptance, home. And so they lived, not forever because nothing is eternal in this world, but they lived well, lived fully, lived loving and being loved. And when the time came to depart, they departed in peace, knowing they had lived a beautiful story, a story of overcoming, a story of courage, a story of true love. Hope Valley Farm continued in the hands of the children, who continued the tradition, who continued the shelter for needy women, who continued the Christmas feast open to all, who continued honoring the memory not only of Isabel, who started that legacy of kindness, but also of Edward and Mary, who transformed that legacy into something even greater. And on Christmas nights, when the chapel is full and the tables are plentiful and the hymns are sung, there is always someone who tells the story, the most beautiful Christmas love story, between the widowed farmer who thought he would never love again, and the forgotten daughter no one wanted, two castaways who found each other in the sea of loneliness, two broken hearts that healed together, two lives that became one, and left a legacy of love, kindness, and hope that remains alive to this day. Because in the end, true love never dies. It continues in the stories told, in the lives touched, in the seeds planted that become leafy trees giving shade and fruit for future generations. And Edward and Mary planted a whole forest. A forest of love that keeps growing, keeps sheltering, keeps nourishing forever.